Nearly two-thirds of voters in Switzerland have rejected a proposal that would have seen executives in that country paid just 12 times more than the lowest paid worker. It would have seen Switzerland, home to some of the world's most powerful companies, become home to some of the world's lowest paid executives. And at least one South African chief executive says we should consider capping salaries here. This is Tonight. I'm Bruce Whitfield, and with me this evening, Martin Westcott, who's executive chairman of PE Corporate Services, and Gusti, who's a director at Talent Africa. Capping wages, that's terribly socialist, which is not very Swiss, is it, Martin Westcott?
Not at all, I would say, Bruce. But I think there are many complexities behind that. I think you need to look at what a ratio is, a ratio of that type is, and it's actually best used as a relative rather than an absolute measure, because as we progress over time, pay differentials can increase or decrease if you look at the measure on an exactly comparable basis with prior years. If you look at it as an absolute measure, you've got to factor in things like what is the size of the organization, what is the complexity of the executive job, what is the technology that they use in the country concerned. Is it a capital-intensive or labor-intensive country, and for that matter, a capital or labor-intensive economic sector or industry?
And you would think if there was one country in the world that might be able to get some kind of agreement on something like this, Gusti, it would be a place like Switzerland. It's a terribly expensive place to live. The lowest paid worker in Switzerland probably gets paid 100 times more, I don't know, than in South Africa. It's probably a far more egalitarian society than we used to hear.
I think the fact you need to take into account in Switzerland is that your lower level employees are really well qualified employees and delivering good productivity. So it also should be linked to the level of the job at the bottom and productivity for the lower level employees as well.
We in South Africa seem to be terribly excited and get very excitable about the symptom. And the symptom is low pay or big pay differentials. We get less excited about the reasons why we've got such a big pay differential, and that's because of this huge skills gap that exists. We should be getting more cross about that, shouldn't we?
Definitely, and there is a suggestion that it's not only to financial performance of the company or how the share price is going up, but it should be linked to corporate social responsibility, to the spent on training and sustainability and environmental issues. Are these companies recycling? What are they doing about saving electricity? So it's more than just the financial results that should be taken into account.
Well, the Swiss have rejected this concept of 12-to-1 ratio. There's a chief executive in South Africa, comes out of the government sector originally, Coetzer, related to the finance minister, and he has come out with an interesting statement. Have a listen to what he was saying on CNBC Africa the other day about his vision for PPC, the company he now runs.
I think in a South African environment, if we can get to 1:40, I think we're doing incredibly well. You know, the ratio in many of our companies is 1:, close to 1,000 sometimes. And this is a challenge to all of us. I'm not saying, we want to become socialists, but certainly we can't continue in a sustainable way to have the levels of inequality we have in South Africa.
That's Coetzer, the Chief Executive Officer of PPC. A ratio, he says, for PPC that would be good is 40-to-1. So Coetzer earns 40 times, theoretically, the lowest paid worker at PPC. That's got some interesting consequences to it, because what do you need to do? Well, you lower the Chief Executive's salary to be 40 times higher than the lowest paid worker. The consequence of that, Gusti, is?
Well, you need to go and see what is happening in his company. How many people are employed? Where are they operating? Before you can determine if the 1:40 is realistic or not. They apparently took pay cuts and could increase the lowest person by quite a substantial
Executives
amount.
at PPC were encouraged to take the pay cuts, and many of them did, in order to narrow that wage gap, yes.
But now it's in a company where there are 40,000 employees. So cutting just at the top is not really going to benefit the people at the lower end.
And the consequence of cutting at the top, of course, is yes, the current chief executive may think that this is a good and noble thing to do. He doesn't need more than R1 million or R2 million a year in which to survive, and he's used to a civil service salary, so that's okay. One day when he quits, you're not exactly going to have people lining up for the chief executive of PPC's job, are you, Martin?
I think that's so, Bruce. In a recession, you can encourage executives to do all sorts of things because job retention is extremely critical. But we have to ask the question in South Africa if we are to regulate what people earn at the top of organizations, and if we are also to prescribe that we must have 75% of those people as Africans, with all this prescription and constraint around what you pay them, all the rules and regulations you really have to say, in a skills-strapped economy where we're lacking 800,000 engineers, IT professionals, top accountants, etc., and many of those at top executive level, where are we going to get the skills? How are we going to stop them traipsing off overseas and running the global companies, which mobility
is that an
encourages?
argument that is valid, though? I mean, is the South African executive workforce that mobile, Gusti, that it can say, you want me to take 40 times the cleaner's salary? Well, I tell you what, you can take that job, give it to someone else. I'm off to go and run Merrill Lynch or something.
It is a fact. South African executives are well received abroad. Whether they go to the UK or America, if they don't go there, they go to the Middle East or they take expatriate packages into Africa. They're not going to stay.
And that's the risk for the South African economy. So what you do on the other side is you raise the average lower end of wage. That then compresses the gap, doesn't it?
Indeed.
Or does it push half the people who are working in that particular segment onto the streets?
I think you get into all sorts of arguments about productivity and the cost of labour, and unemployment is so critical a factor in this country here that to try and cut out staff, because obviously if you've only got a certain amount of money you can pay, or a certain pool of cash, if you like, to meet your salary and wage expenses. Above that, you start becoming uncompetitive in terms of your economic pricing in your organisation. So the quid pro quo, in a sense, is if you increase wages at the bottom too substantially, you've got to cut back on people. You've got to go the mechanised or capital-intensive route, which a lot of even the resource industries at the moment are seriously contemplating doing.
And that's not a tenable solution for South Africa. We are a labour-intensive economy by need, simply because we're not that productive.
Absolutely.
Okay, so here we've got a situation then where the Swiss have rejected a 12-to-1 ratio. We're saying, Coetzer Gordon, very noble, nice idea to have you want to be paid 40 times more than your lowest paid worker, but it's not necessarily a realistic scenario?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a fair assessment?
I think yes and no, Bruce. I think that to try and set a pay differential, even for a sort of uniform group of sized companies across the whole economy is naive. I don't think you can achieve it, quite frankly. I think you've got to look at it on a per company basis. It's a bit like saying, what should the quantum of remuneration for a chief executive be? There are many of them running different size, different types of companies. So you've actually got to go away from prescribing that and leave it to your remuneration committees and say, apply your minds,
okay,
be
but
responsible.
the remuneration committees are not covering themselves in glory at all. We've got the Public Investment Corporation, which manages the pensions of civil servants, voting against remuneration committees. They're saying the Sasol chief executive, David Constable's salary, twice what it was last year, is ridiculous. They're voting against that. They're voting against Mark Udifani's salary, and he's based in London. I think they're also opposing Goldfield's package as well. They're saying the remuneration committees have got this all wrong, Gusti.
The threat is not the remuneration committee or approving it. The threat is the remuneration committee not approving the executive director's remuneration.
But are we apathetic, or are we frightened of losing great talent? We've got chief executive, we've got Johnny, know him. He's delivered returns of 20% a year through the recession. We like him, he's doing very well. You know what, he's a bit expensive, but you know what, he's delivering the goods, so we keep him on. Is that apathy, Gusti, or is that desperation?
No, but you remember what my colleague just said here. You don't pay for the person, you pay for the job, what he's doing.
No, okay, but
Because
at the same
some
time,
people
Whitey Basson, okay, and Richard Brasher, and all of the other retail bosses in South Africa do essentially the same thing. So do you pay them all the same?
Yes, but look at Whitey's background. Whitey built a company. Whitey is giving employment to how many thousand people? Shouldn't he be recognized for that?
But the pay differential in his company is probably one of the biggest in the country.
But if he didn't do the successful job he did, there were going to be 40,000 people not employed.
And that's a very real situation in South Africa.
If it wasn't you, it was one of your colleagues who interviewed the chairman of ShopRite Checkers, and he said, he's just damn good. And if he cost twice as much, I would pay him twice as much.
Pay him anyway, absolutely.
You know, it is a rare, as I think as Gusti said, it's a very rare and a very priceless skill if you're able to build a business and and really take it to continuously high growth over a long period of time. You know, the average CEO tenure is about 5 to 7 years.
Yeah.
Now we say, why do football stars make so much money? Well, because they've got a short tenure. If you're Wayne Rooney, you've got 10 years to play, and after that you've got to...
It feels like he's been around forever.
Does indeed,
It really
but he
does.
started young.
You look at his hairline, which has gone and come back.
Yeah, right.
It's kind
you
of
can
hard
do if
to...
you've got lots of money, I suppose.
It's kind of absolutely get the hair transplants. But the point is, this has really got to be then. There's a broad political debate around this, and it's nice because it distracts from the real political issues. So we could throw we throw things at business, and we say you're greedy and you're evil. Is there a business anywhere in this country that's getting pay right, Martin?
That's a very difficult question to answer, Bruce, because yes, many are getting pay right in the sense that they're looking at it responsibly. The Remco these days in that company or in those companies is playing a much more proactive and responsible and mature role. They are looking at pay structures across the entire organization, and they're adopting a very mature approach when they're looking at what executives pay and the balance between incentive pay and fixed pay and so on and so on. So yes, getting it right, or very nearly getting it right, if you like. And also I think we've got to be cognizant of the fact that pay differentials have varied over time. I mean, Peter Drucker in the 1960s said a pay differential of 10 or 12 to 1 sounds about right to me. By the end of the 80s, he was saying pay whatever they require because growth is king at the moment. So you know you have a tremendous amount of debate on the issue.
Gusti, to your mind, is anyone getting it right?
You know what? I see more chief executives today say, bring me a specialist skill guy. I can bring him from overseas. He can earn more than I earn. I don't mind. But with him, the whole company can do better.
But we still sit with this unsustainable wage gap, which is unresolvable, it would seem.
No, the Altex is doing much better. There was a study done between 2003 and 2010 where they looked at the remuneration of chief executives on the Altex, and they were doing much better than some of the other
Would you
listed
rather been
entities.
invested in the top 20 companies on the JSE or
Yeah.
the top 20 Altex
Yeah.
companies on the JSE?
Sure, point
which comes to the point that perhaps some of the executives are worth the money they're paid.
Exactly.
But good to see also that there is pressure coming from the Public Investment Corporation, which is leaning on the boards of companies to say, hold on a second, you want to pay the boss how much? Justify their existence, tell us why they're worth it, and then perhaps we will consider it. It's a complex issue, and in particular in a place like South Africa, if the Swiss can't get it right, what hope have we got? My thanks this evening to Martin Westcott, who's Executive Chairman at PE Corporate Services, and Gusti Coetzer, who's the Director at Talent Africa. That's it from the team on Tonight. There'll be more tonight tomorrow. Good night.